There was no lights.
Yeah, there's no light.
And they, you were born, you had plague, you died. Right. This is on a good day.
I completely disagree with what is going on because, of course, people can't be depressed all the time. Number one. Number two, the Dark Ages, what we want to think about them is an extremely Eurocentric concept. In fact, only parts of Europe were in this so-called Dark Ages.
Okay. One of the things that we deal with here with this project is, do words matter?
Right.
This grew out of basically an argument, a discussion. Mm-hmm. A discussion is basically like an argument, except we use bigger guns, over whether words matter. I typically take an attitude that says, no, thoughts matter. Words, I could call you ugly and think it means beautiful. It's my thought that counts.
Right.
I usually get slapped when I do that.
Well, and excuse me, I argue back with him. He's leaving out half the conversation because really he might use a word any way he wants to, but somebody is listening to that word, and that word might mean something completely different to that other person.
This was a reference that we actually made during the point where we had no sound, because I pressed the mute button, and which was that in Lewis Carroll in Alice Goes Through the Looking Glass, there's the line that says, when I use a word, it means what I intend it to mean, nothing more, nothing less, to which Alice says, the question is, can you do that? To which Humpty Dumpty says, the question is, who's the boss? Me or the word? But, so this is an issue. Does it matter if we call it the Dark Ages? Does it change our perception? But as we're doing the research, we ran into this really strange problem, which is, what are the Dark Ages?
What are the Dark Ages? We hear the term bandied around, and we think, oh, well, it's this particular time. Well, when you start researching it, you find historians can't even decide when it started.
Yes, and there's also, well, let's just talk about...
Because in general, they'll say, well, when the Roman Empire fell, that's problematic in and of itself.
1453.
Right, 1453.
All right, so let's talk about, so I was looking and doing some research and finding every source I looked at gave me a different date for the start of the Dark Ages.
Right.
Some of the earliest are like the Council of Nicaea, which was a Christian conference in newly Christianized Rome. Right,
which was called by Constantine. And it was the start of the creation of the hierarchy of the Catholic, not the Catholic, but the Christian Church. The Christian Church had just become the official religion of the Empire of Rome. Constantine, of course, moves the headquarters of the Roman Empire to Constantinople. It's nice when you're king and you get to name the city after yourself, because you never get lost. Because everyone's telling you, oh, yeah.
Another group of people said it came with the death of Hypatia. Now, Hypatia, many people know about by now, but it's kind of, I'm going to do a refresher. Anyway, she's very trendy to talk about. But Hypatia oops, that's not the right picture. That's the right picture. Hypatia, she was...
Gosh, that's an awesome shot.
Yeah, she must have had it all really still. She was classified as a great beauty in her time. She was a mathematician. She lived in Alexandria. And in 418, a group of Christians decided that they didn't like this pagan mathematician and scientist calculating the position of the stars and figuring out. She was a brilliant mathematician.
Yeah.
And so they killed her. Can I describe how?
No, that's okay.
It was really good. Okay, look it up sometime. Go to Wikipedia, look up Death of Hypatia. It's really good. Anyway,
moving on.
But the point is, Hypatia was killed by Christians, and this was kind of a turning point, that it was Christians suppressing knowledge and wisdom. And so certain people who have a more anti-Christian perception say, this is the start of the Dark Ages.
Yeah, this is the Christians starting the Dark Ages upon themselves by getting rid of the ideas of innovation and knowledge.
Which is not without reason. Another one said the Vandals sacking Rome in 455. Where everybody loves Rome. Another group says it was the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476.
But of course, during this time, the capital of Rome was in Constantinople.
Ravenna.
And Ravenna for the Western Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, the eastern half, was doing just fine in the Byzantine area in Constantinople and stayed fat and happy for quite some time.
But this is seen by many people as the end of antiquity and the beginning of the medieval or the Dark Ages.
Yeah, the fall of Rome and the wonderful things that Rome had, slavery,
Well, okay, they were apart from the slavery,
patriarchy.
apart from the slavery and the patriarchy, they did have roads.
They did have roads.
All right.
And aqueducts. Actually, no, they didn't have aqueducts. They were starting to lose the aqueducts by this time.
Well, they were okay.
Right.
The fall of the Roman Empire is beyond the scope of this paper.
Yes,
by the way,
but it was something that very early historians, i.e., Gibbons, pointed out and said, yes, this is the date right here.
Okay. All right. There's so much to get bogged down into here, but we're going to move on. Talk about Beth Dias. I'm not even sure how you pronounce his name. Wrote a book called The Consolation of Philosophy in 523 as he was waiting to be executed, and he was hauled into Constantinople. And let me tell you about how he was executed.
Oh, stop.
All right. Anyway, Beth Dias wrote this book called The Consolation of Philosophy. He wrote many works. Mm-hmm. He was a really influential philosopher.
He was a very influential Christian philosopher. He gathered together works by Aristotle and translated them into Latin and sanitized them for a Christian audience. And so this is one of the ways that we see Aristotle influencing Christianity from the very beginning, or close to the very beginning, because of works like Boethius.
This is a picture of Beth Dias or Boethius, however. That's done much later. I just thought it was a cool picture. Anyway,
that is a cool picture.
But okay, so you've got.
And you had one more.
Well, we've got a group of catastrophic events which happened in the West, which changed everything. Which are one of them happened in El Salvador.
Really?
Which led to the Dark Ages.
Cool.
Yes, in El Salvador, you had the eruption of Mount Ilopango.
I'll let you say
that. Okay, Ilopango was a large volcano, and this is new scholarship, knowing what happened. But essentially in 536, a volcano exploded, possibly two, that's in one theory, and it caused massive darkening of the skies.
Yes.
And winter and famine. And so the entire Western Roman Empire went into quite a bit of decline, and it's been argued by some at least that this was a cause of the decline of the Roman Empire, the Dark Ages, because it really was dark.
It really,
at least for a few.
Okay, but our last culprit of the evening for when did the Dark Ages start was the plague of Justinian. Justinian was the Roman emperor in Constantinople. He was really quite an influential Roman emperor in that, or Byzantine emperor, to divide the two, in that he codified the laws, the Justinian Code, which became really very much the set of laws that will become our more modern laws. But Justinian, at one point in his rule, is going to end up having a plague go through. Was it the Bubonic Plague?
It was the Bubonic Plague. It was actually, they found that out also relatively recently. They dug somebody out and it was actually the Bubonic Plague.
Right.
But the result was Justinian had actually gone from Constantinople and reconquered all of Italy. Right. And was basically reestablishing the Roman Empire. Everything's going fine, but then you've got a volcano, then you've got massive darkness, then you've got famine, then you've got a plague, probably related.
Right. And you've also got some very interesting people, the Sassanids, knocking at the door of Constantinople.
But there was another issue here, true, also, which complicates things, which is because of the famines, because of the issues, Justinian didn't have the money to do all of his military campaigns. So he did the rational thing. He raised taxes.
Yes. And by raising taxes, he still couldn't get enough money to pay for his army. And so he played with the currency.
Yes, but the point is, when you're in northern Italy and you're starving to death and you're struggling and you want your government to help you and they respond by raising your taxes so they can go conquer somebody else, your empire isn't meeting my needs anymore.
I found that this empire has no longer met my needs.
We think it's best for us to basically go.
So we see the strengthening of the schism between the East and the West, between Western Europe, as we know it now, and Eastern Europe, or otherwise known as the Byzantine Empire, and Bulgaria.
Yes, Bulgaria. And a whole range of things happened. But the Western Empire, which is where many of our ancestors are from, definitely went into some sort of decline. You can call it the Dark Ages. You can call it the early medieval period. You can call it that time when everybody got sick and was depressed all day.
Right.
Although you probably shouldn't.
No.
But one thing we can all agree on, if we can't agree on when it started, is when the Dark Ages ended.
No, we can't.
Not even a little bit?
Not even close.
Well,
we are going to have what, a almost 800 year, at least 700 year
700 years of distinctions
of
of arguments.
distinction of when the Dark Ages actually ended.
Which, of course, they ended in 800 with the crowning of Charlemagne as the Holy Roman Empire.
No.
And they reestablished the empire, and forevermore the Roman and
that is the tale that is going to be told by the French, definitely, that Charlemagne is going to reintroduce all sorts of new aspects of empire to Europe, where they had been missing for 400
and they made some good
years.
art. They did some good science during the time of
Yeah, we'll
Charlemagne.
show you some of,
so we don't have much information about what happened between 500 and 800.
Right.
But after 800, what happens? Again, here's kind of a timeline. These are dates that I found. All of these were listed on websites for when the so-called Dark Ages ended. The crowning of Charlemagne, William the Conqueror taking over England. That's actually in a BBC documentary.
Yes, that is an extremely Anglo-Saxon-centric view of when the Dark Ages ended. And they are overlooking the fact that there was some pretty intense intellectual development in Ireland during the time of Charlemagne.
The British would never overlook the contributions of the Irish.
Yes, absolutely not.
We've got the First Crusade in 1096.
Right.
Which was somewhat significant because you had people leaving Europe, going out, and they were successful. Mm-hmm. So Europe overtook other regions, was bringing in ideas.
Right. Oh yeah, you had the nobility of Europe, the knights and the lords of the manor and the kings and the princes. It was something everybody wanted to be part of, going to the Holy Land, trying to take Jerusalem back. They managed to do it once. So it was the situation of everybody joined the army, went to foreign lands, and killed them. And then they
brought back ideas. There was growth. Ideas. There was innovation.
One of the things they brought back that was the most important, that created a real stir in Europe.
Zero.
The zero.
Oh, nothing.
That's nothing. Anyway, yeah.
Jokes.
Yeah. I make these
our jokes
on my
are from
lecture.
The Middle Ages, yes.
So yeah, they're going to bring back a whole bunch of interesting stuff.
Okay, now very shortly thereafter, you've got Abelard, which a lot of people won't. And feedback.
Nothing more than
feedback. You've got Abelard, who is again popular because of his romance is a great story and it's been made into a movie. But Abelard was the start of. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm talking too much.
Okay. Well, around 1100, you had the rise of the university system. We had the cathedral schools going for about a century before that. But what really takes off is the teaching of the liberal arts and the university system.
First university was founded in Morocco, just so you know.
Right. But then it starts out in Bologna and Paris, and we're not just teaching people to be literate theologians, we are teaching people to be lawyers and doctors, and moving out from there. And we move up from the trivium, which taught Latin grammar, rhetoric, and logic, and we moved into the quadrivium, which added to that, oh dear, geometry, mathematics, architecture, and music. And then we get into bigger and bigger studies. So with Abelard, with the rise of the university system, you've got centralized pockets of intellectuals who are not stuck out in monasteries avoiding everybody else.
We also start to see writing, which is interesting. We see poetry. We see a growth of stuff, not like we did 200 years later. But
because all of a sudden now you have more and more and more literate people. What are they going to do in their evenings or afternoons or whatever? They want to read, and they're reading for fun.
But it's dark.
And people, well, yeah, that's the thing. Was it dark? Was it over by then?
So a couple other things. Gutenberg establishes the first mobile press, changes the world, 1444.
Yeah.
That was the end of the Dark Ages, according to some people.
Yep.
To other people, it was Columbus and opening up the new world.
Opening up the new world, that you all of a sudden had continents and tribes of people or groups of people that nobody had even known about.
And a big one that people still use today is Martin Luther. And I'm going to share with you a quote that I found on the internet just the other day. From 590 to 517, the Roman Church dominated the Western world. The Roman Catholic Church controlled religion, philosophy, morals, politics, art, and education. This was the Dark Ages. It goes on from there. But the point is, this is an extremely Protestant perspective that basically says the Dark Ages were the Catholics controlled things.
The Dark Ages were all the Catholics' fault.
Okay. So,
you want to play the game?
well, it's kind of a game. I'm going to ask for a little audience participation here.
Yep.
It's also a sneaky way of getting in some history without getting into the sea body.
Yep.
So, this is a title slide from a movie, a great film. This is from Monty Python and the Holy Grail,
Yay,
set
our
in
favorite.
England in 932.
AD.
By the way, is pretty ridiculous since the first stories of Arthur. Are from the 9th century, from around 800.
So what we're going to talk about is Monty Python and the Holy Grail, probably the most wrong film about this time.
It's a comedy. I will forgive them for being wrong, and also Braveheart is worse.
But Braveheart is later than this. But definitely, you also remember had Terry Jones was the director, and Terry Jones was a pretty outstanding medievalist.
Okay.
He knew his stuff.
So, the Bubonic Plague is Dark Ages. The Bubonic Plague. Question for you. How many people died? Again, the movie set in 932. So let's go 100 years before and 100 years after. How many people in Europe died from the Bubonic Plague between 832 and 1032? Any guesses?
Any guesses? Hang on. We'll let him type.
Let's see if anybody wants to guess.
Uva says, bring out your dead. Aha!
Yes, a literate person.
Yep.
Uvas, you're a jerk.
Ruining our game.
This is our setup. All right. Nobody died from the plague between 832 and 1032.
There was no bubonic plague.
This is significant. It came back in 1348.
1347. Anyway.
Technical people. Okay. So that's pretty significant, actually, that the bubonic plague was not a factor in what we typically call the Dark Ages. It was from the time which some people call the Renaissance. Or
the High Middle Ages. Okay. But it's definitely not what we're thinking of as the Dark Ages. So the Bring Out Your Dead.
All right.
That's out of
I was going to play video clips, but then I got afraid of copyright laws.
But you guys, most of you probably know the movies so well.
Okay. So this is the scene with the monks.
Yes. Requiem. Thump.
Okay. So how many monks or others belong to self-punishing groups or flagellants between 832 and 1032? Flagellant groups. There were probably how many things?
No answers yet?
Nobody
They're
knows.
Still thinking?
They're thinking, tick, tick, tick. All right.
Beach Price says 500.
500. That's a good guess. It's a little bit high, actually. The correct number is 0.
0. Oh, Eye of Thoth says 1.
Eye of Thoth
maybe there might have been one kinky monk hanging around somewhere. But definitely, the Flagellants were a group of self-abusing people that came around after the Black Death in 1347. So there were
those two were together.
Yeah,
well, they got them right. So, they were just in the wrong off by 600 years. All right, one more scene that I love from this, which is the witch trial scene.
The witch trial.
Yeah. Okay.
She turned me into a newt. I
got better. I love it. Oh yes.
We all know the lines.
All right. Yes, everybody. Okay. So, how many people were tried or punished for witchcraft between 832 and 1032? Do I need to wait for an answer? They've probably figured out the answer by now.
Beej asks, is the next answer 0?
Why, yes, it is.
Ding, 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 ding.
This is a curious thing, which kind of sheds an interesting light on what we call, on the early Middle Ages, the Dark Ages. The church doctrines, and I've seen lengthy things that basically said people who claim to be witches are silly and superstitious, and we're not going to pay any attention. They did punish people for heresy. They did burn people for heresy. They did abuse people. But the first record we have of a witch trial is from around, the first ordering of an investigation was 1275. They did not get going until around the 15th century, which is, what, according to that earlier chart by many people, is no longer in the Dark Ages.
Right.
So there. Okay.
We're now destroying
all of your myths. But one of the things, and we're going to talk about this a little later because our notes are disorganized.
Right.
The Dark Ages is a phrase that is used by, there's two different groups that look at the world of the past a little differently. There's historians.
There's several different. Oh, yeah.
And there's art historians.
Yeah. Historians use one set of periodization, and there's a lot of conflict about which, as you just saw, there's a lot of conflict about when something ends, when something begins, da 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 da. However, there's another group of historians, art historians, who are a little bit different.
Now, she's a conventional historian, so she goes to the other side of the football games. They beat each other. They sit on opposite ends of the room at the parties, except they're all introverts, so nobody talks to anybody anyway.
Yeah, so nobody talks to us. So we're indistinguishable. But art historians definitely want their periodization, and they are real persnickety. But of course, they're curating works for the public.
Well, and it's really hard to say then you look at history that, on September 10th, 476, the Western Roman Empire fell, antiquity is over, everybody. Put away your swords, put away your armor. Let's get, different armor. We're put on your plate mail. We're going to go fight dragons. It's the Middle Ages.
And so...
Do they have a party?
Honestly, no parties. We're introverts. Honestly, I think part of the difference is the fact that historians get to bury our stuff in big, thick books. Art historians put it out there on the wall for everybody to see. So people are going to get a little bit huffy.
So we're going to run through a little bit more stuff, and this is going to be, it's another quiz, but we don't have to wait for answers necessarily. Let's play Guess the Century. We're going to look at some works of art, and we're going to talk about, how and when they figure in, and, are they early modern, late modern, medieval?
No, I don't remember all of these, so I'm going to be guessing along with our...
You want to make a guess? Because I have a cheat sheet. Okay, this is an image, of course, of farmers. This is, actually, I don't have the source for it. This picture is from 1320.
Yep.
Now you look at the faces are long, they're serious, there's no sense of perspective. It's also, the guy's not a nice boss, he's a big taskmaster.
But look at that background. Look at how busy that background is. Their skies didn't look like that. This later medieval period had a tendency to paint their walls really garishly with designs like this. So this would have been oftentimes what your wall in your house would have looked like, because you wouldn't have had any posters or anything to hang on it. So you painted the wall crazy.
But this is a classic image of what we think as medieval. Notice the elongated forms and the hands when you can see them, and this isn't great resolution. Mm-hmm. Kind of worn out and drawn. Okay, how about this one?
The pelican feeding its what is a baby pelican called?
Peliquita?
I don't know. So this one is going to really surprise you. I just love this image.
This is a mosaic. This is actually on the ceiling.
And extra points for anyone who can tell us what state of the United States uses this image on their Great Seal.
I would say Louisiana.
Damn it. You got it. Anyway.
I didn't know, folks. By the way, that wasn't in the rehearsal. This is from about 750 CE.
This is Charlemagne's castle.
CE or 80 if you prefer. Historians like to use the term CE just because it doesn't get quite as persnickety. This is from a chapel that was built by orders of Charlemagne.
By the way, our camera is really out of focus.
Our camera's out of focus?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I will check that in a second. If you want
put
to
up an image.
Put up an image.
Well, how do I do it?
This is the controller. Okay. Any guesses when this is from?
Ooh. Well, see, this one is interesting. This one is a fresco. It's painted directly on the wall. And fresco basically was when the paints that they used did not have really good binders. And so you would put tint, annelid, various dyes, and mix that, or put that on the wet plaster. And those really brilliant reds. That's a chair that really looks pretty realistic. Her clothing looks great.
Okay,
but
so
I have a guess.
Okay, does anybody else have a guess? One person here says 1500s.
Okay.
You have any other? Go ahead, make your guess.
My guess is late Roman.
Never take a historian to a party. Yes, that actually that's early Roman. That's from about 50 BC or BCE.
50 BCE. Okay, so that is even before.
Now this is a carving. This is very detailed carving. Obviously, this is not something that could have been made in the Middle Ages. I'm going to go ahead and speed this up a little bit.
Oh, you're kidding.
What?
Of course it was made in the middle. Well, I don't know when it was made. I don't. I love the angels. Yeah. So we are talking about angels. I'm going to guess about 14th century.
1285. So close. 13th century.
Close.
Yeah. Okay.
13th century.
This is kind of a no. I love this. This I'll tell you. This is from 1050, and notice it's good art. It may not meet all of the rules that you have about other things, but it's expressive.
It's got a personality.
Yes.
It's got a real personality.
Also, look at the detail in the clothes.
Yeah.
I just love it. But you've got these elongated fingers, which were very common in certain times. I'm not sure what it was.
Well, remember, when we see cartoon fingers, there's only 3 fingers on that hand. This is 4. That's why these fingers look so odd to us.
That's an interesting idea. Okay. Now this, do you know this? You know what this is?
I know what that is.
Okay.
Yeah, we talked about that earlier.
This is hopelessly misleading because, if you can pick out the details, this is a rider on a horse trampling over a man in some sort of armor. They didn't have any sense of perspective, and yet the horse looks very accurate, but the face and the scale is all messed up.
Mm-hmm. Uvas says 1500 on this.
On this?
Yeah.
No, this is actually this is a very small piece of a helmet. So this is a detail that's on the side piece right here of a helmet that was from the Sutton Hoo treasure ship found in England. It's dated from about 650.
650
CE, yes.
Yeah, CE.
Okay. So
the Sutton Hoo hoard is something we're going to talk about.
Sutton Hoo is amazing.
Yep.
This is one that I love, and this is, by the way, in doing some prep, I found some classic stuff about medieval art versus Renaissance art and all the difference. There's some sense of perspective here. Well, if I tell you that, then you'll know the year approximately. Okay. But there's perspective, so obviously this is Renaissance, correct? Mm-hmm. Well, the perspective isn't perfect. Mm-hmm. This is Giotto. This is from 1315.
1315.
Yeah. Very detailed stuff, and really not fair to say it's not what you think of as medieval. Giotto was, of course, ahead of his time.
Way ahead of his time. And this guy.
Yes.
Of course, I remember this is.
Oh, you remember who this is?
Charles the Bald?
This is Charles the Bald, even though he looks like he's got hair there.
Yeah, that's an embarrassing nickname.
Charles the Bald. This is from 850.
850. This is Charlemagne's grandson.
Yes,
I believe,
who commissioned a lot of art, and he was like the end of a period of artistic renaissance.
Yep.
I hate that word, but anyway, this is one that.
Wow. It's unfortunately dark.
It's dark, but this is one that when I saw, I was very shocked when I saw the date on this.
Well, that's single point perspective. If you look at the floor tiles, definitely. And the fashions look very 15th century, 14th and 15th century.
But look, they're in a straight line. They're flat. They're very presentational. The faces are long.
No.
I thought it was early. Yes, it's from 1450.
1450. Yes. Yeah, okay. Those costumes.
All right, time for a trick question.
X. Oh, come on. They know that one.
Okay, here's what I did not know until I read this. This is obviously from the Bayeux Tapestry, which commemorates William's victory in 1066. However, they don't actually know the date of the Bayeux Tapestry.
It was probably around that time.
That's one of the guesses, but there's a lot of debate over that. The first historic mention of it isn't from the 15th century, which is like,
goodness.
I guess somebody kept it locked up. I don't want you looking at this, you know. We're historians. We want to look at your bath towels.
And of course, during the French Revolution, they wanted to cut it up and use it to put canvases over wagons.
Can you imagine having that as a napkin? What an experience that would be for a meal.
Yes. I use tapestry as a napkin.
All right. Here's one that if you know it, you know it. Might be a little easier for some people. If you don't know it, you don't know it. This is a piece. It's about 2 or 3 inches long. That's gold with some inlay work. So it's a carving.
Work. Yeah. Look at that thing.
Yeah, that's from 650. That's Sutton Hoo. That is a belt buckle.
More from the Sutton Hoo. That is a belt.
Sutton Hoo, for the benefit of anybody who doesn't know this, I would recommend looking it up. Sutton Hoo is a Viking style ship burial ground.
Right.
And there was a ship that was basically buried in England. I think it's in Oxfordshire. And it was found, I think like 100 years ago, not very long ago.
Wasn't it? There was one that was found by by a metal detector, an amateur metal detector.
So they found this ship and this incredible range of treasures, and there's still a lot of debate. They're pretty sure of the name of a king from the 7th century who was there.
Wow.
It was a burial ground, so there's stuff from other periods, but it's an amazing find. It's apparently an amazing museum. Take me to England. I want to go see it.
I want to go see it.
All right. What do we got here? Well, this one, I had thrown this up earlier.
Yeah,
so I don't need to spend any time on this. This is a picture of Beth Dias, the philosopher. It's obviously from an illuminated manuscript. I love the use of color. There's some effort at perspective. This is from 1385. Now, finally, these are 3 different pictures of women from 3 different periods. And, you can probably tell which one is Dark Ages. What do you think?
I don't know. Well, obviously the woman with an ermine, that's
a famous picture. That's Da Vinci.
Definitely famous picture. Is that Da Vinci?
That's Da Vinci, yes.
I thought it was the School of Da Vinci.
I don't know. It said on the website where I stole it from, they said Da Vinci. They could be wrong too. The other 2, what's interesting is our stereotypical image of medieval art is long faces, depressed, don't show emotion.
Babies. Yes, as Beach Price says, old babies.
Okay,
yes.
But just you're looking at this picture, I find it interesting because, in point of fact, they are in chronological order. The painting on the far left is from 1310. The woman in the middle is from 1420, over 100 years later. And you can see there's a lot less expression, a lot less emotion in there. And of course, the woman with ermine is from 1490. So you got some progression there in art. But kind of what I wanted to say, that's my flagellant image.
Yeah, we can keep going.
We can keep going. All right. It's not that good. So anyway, the point that I was trying to make with some of this is that art, it's still good even if you don't understand it, even if they're not doing things the same way, even if their sense of perspective is wrong.
Right.
There were people who were good artists all along.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. No question. And of course, one of the hallmarks of what art historians will say is the Renaissance is perspective, drawing in perspective. But the Romans painted very nicely in perspective. What the Renaissance, the quote, Renaissance artist brought, Giotto was the man who really brought this out, was create a system with the horizon line and a vanishing point right in the middle. This is all stuff that flat earthers keep telling us is why the earth looks flat. This whole idea of perspective, and they're totally wrong. It's a, as the French say, a trompe l'oeil. It fools the eye. And you can very easily teach yourself how to draw in perspective and make it look really pretty convincing. And you can have more than one vanishing point, and it gets really crazy. But when I told Jerry, the first time I told Jerry, yeah, they all did it with rulers and strings and no big deal. And he was like, what? They didn't just do it?
That's cheating.
No, it's cheating. Yes. And then I told him about the camera Lucinda.
All right.
Yeah. Anyway, that was supposedly an optical device.
So this is kind of the art history version of where we're going. But let's talk about what we can agree on about something called the Dark Ages.
Right.
While we had civilizations growing in China, Baghdad, Istanbul, and Oslo, You had
and the Iberian Peninsula,
and the Iberian
Spain.
Peninsula. All right, and the Iberian Peninsula. Okay, fine.
Yeah,
But
you had flourishing civilizations everywhere except one place.
But there were still some things that we can agree on what we kind of term the Dark Ages. And they involved, there was a loss of central authority.
Right.
And this is a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
This is a bigger deal than people who want to be autonomous think, because this limits your exchange, your ideas. There wasn't.
And hang on. And when you have empire, a large central authority, that really makes your history much easier to trace because they're keeping records. You can't have a central authority without massive amounts of administration and records.
Okay. But central authorities do tend to accomplish sort of things. One of the things that happened with the decline of the Roman Empire in the West is you didn't have any taxation anymore.
Right. You
lost
great.
The
tax base.
Everybody's happy. No
Yay!
taxes.
Libertarian dream.
Instead, what you had was basically, if you were a king or a lord and you wanted somebody to work for you, it's like, would you please go beat up these guys and I'll give you some land.
Yeah. That all of a sudden you're
but you have to come fight for me whenever I say.
Yes, without taxation and without professional armies, without law enforcement, you get what was developed during this period, the feudal system, which is a system that works basically without money. It's a barter system.
So what happens if I have chickens and you have shoes, but you have enough chickens?
Then you're out of luck. You got to go somewhere else to find someone who needs shoes, so I can have who needs chickens. So I can, yeah. And here's your change for a chicken. Clunk. Yeah, we're having a sale. We only need 3/4 of a chicken.
Okay.
Which part do you want back?
Gizzards and feet. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
But so you didn't have taxation. You had these armies that were formed, and one of the other things that you had to fund a state, and this is not a way to build a strong society, is stealing.
Yes.
So I have this little kingdom.
Right.
We'll call it dukedom land or something, and they've got stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have taxes, but I want money.
Right.
And you've promised to fight for me.
Right.
You won't give me any money, but you've promised to fight for me.
Right.
So
exactly.
You and a bunch of your peasants go out and attack him and bring me back his spoils.
Because real estate really was the only source of wealth.
People think it still is.
Yeah.
But the point is, this is not a way to lead to innovation, to growth. It's basically cannibalizing your own society.
It's basically cannibalizing the society because you are left with no central authority, no taxation, no professional army, limited or no law enforcement. And of course, you had our friends, the Vikings, running around.
The Vikings didn't go through. Okay, one of the things that we find, the Vikings did pretty well. In fact, the Kingdom of Norway lasted for like 800 years.
Yeah, because they were stealing from everybody else.
They also did just some development.
Yeah, well, yeah, that they eventually will turn into traders. They will turn into colonists.
They took over Russia.
Yeah, they were the Rus. They're one of the tribes of Vikings that settled in Eastern Europe were the Rus.
So one of the things as we're talking about this, I find we're talking about smaller and smaller areas and smaller and smaller times.
Right.
But so there wasn't law enforcement per se, other than that you've given me a bunch of land.
Right.
I have to enforce laws. You guys don't steal. You stole from him. Fine, kill him. Thank you. We're done. Only I get to steal.
Yes.
But law enforcement, fairness, judicial values, a sense of ability. How do you grow? Why would you bother to develop if it's just going to be taken from you?
Yeah, exactly. And if you've got the feudal system with the lord of the manor is the law. He is the legislative, judicial, and executive powers for the land that he controls. So what happens if you're a peasant and you think the lord of the manor has cheated you out of some of your wheat? Where do you go for justice? He is
justice.
He is justice. He's not going to put himself in prison. He's just going to, have somebody beat the crap out of you. So, and if you were inside the system, you were in the law. And if you were outside, you were an outlaw. And this is where we get the term.
Right, which we talked about a little bit in our Robin Hood show.
Right.
Which, hey, this is all tying together really nicely.
No, it isn't.
Okay. You also didn't have trade. Right. So, you have shoes, I have chickens.
Right.
But we live in northern Germany and I want wine and you can't grow wine and I can't grow wine. We don't. So this trade doesn't exist.
That's a different.
Never mind.
Yeah,
okay.
That was climate change.
All right. Little Ice Age. There's a lot of stuff going on here.
Yeah.
And of course, you had a lack of exchange of ideas.
Right. Yeah, and that's the big thing. Because when you've got the only literate people around are in monasteries, shut off from the rest of the world.
By the way, if you've ever visited a monastery in Europe, they got walls around them. And they're often very big walls.
Yes. They're
like
hiding from the Vikings and from everybody else because they couldn't have an army. So definitely they were trying to survive, but they were also, there can be a case made for the Dark Ages being a result of the Catholic Church and the monasteries hoarding the information.
Well, that's kind of what this Protestant speaker was saying.
That's basically one of the cases you can make for the Dark Ages.
But as we've made a couple references to, I'm going to repeat it here. There was more to the world than just Western Europe.
Oh, absolutely.
This is a political map of around 1,000, and you can see there, even calling France and England unified was a bit of a stretch.
That's absolutely ridiculous. France was somewhat unified, of course, under Charlemagne, and most of his area was in Germany as well. He was beating the Saxons, but the concept of a nation of Germany, absolutely not.
I believe this is the papal. This is technically the Holy Roman Empire right here. This blue goes all the way from the Black Sea down, North Sea down to almost to Rome.
But you had the Byzantine Empire, which is that reddish, has got the heel and the toe of Italy.
And yes, they basically.
Meanwhile, you also had the Umayyad dynasties in the Iberian Peninsula in Spain and North Africa, and the Abbasid dynasty over in the Middle East.
And the Umayyads were doing amazing things, but the Abyssinians Abbasids were in Baghdad were producing a lot of the innovations that we know today, like algebra.
Yep.
Anything that starts with an al.
Yeah, al.
Alcohol. They figured out how to ferment alcohol. Anyway, but it is
distilling.
Yes,
not ferment.
I know that. Well,
Babylon, the Sumerians.
But they figured out how to distill alcohol and make very valuable things. Right. So, okay.
It was good for painting.
What I was going to mention is there are other parts of the world. Here's the length of some of these other empires that are going at the same time as we're in the Dark Ages. Mm-hmm. The Tang Dynasty, again, that's only 300 years, but that's when Europe was at its darkest.
Supposedly.
All right.
Yeah. The Abbasid Caliphate in 750 to 1517.
800 years.
800 years of happily in Baghdad and throughout most of the Middle East.
And they had doctors, they created a lot of things. There's actually an article that once argued that they had developed a theory for flight, but it's probably just some crackpot's notebook. But somebody said, hey, I found a crackpot's notebook. This proves something.
Of course, the Byzantine Empire, which was happy as a clam and going very well until 1453, when it was overthrown by the Ottoman Turks. So that's the old Roman Empire, folks. The Byzantine Empire was the old Roman Empire.
And so these were centralized states and all those issues that we talked about. They didn't have those problems with outlaws, with a lack of a professional army. I mean, the Byzantines had a pretty ugly professional army. And the other thing we had in there was Norway.
Sure.
These Vikings, they're not talked about in much of our history because they weren't Christians.
They weren't Christians. Number one, number two, they did not leave behind a lot of written materials. We know them mainly from agriculture, from the guys who dig up clues.
Archaeologists.
Thank you. Archaeological information. And they were really disparate. The Vikings were not just one group; it was a whole bunch of different groups.
Right, but there was a single kingdom in Norway that lasted for hundreds of years. We also had, when we're talking a little bit about the innovations that came, and I just have a slide that I made up that is right here. So we've got, if you look at the developments of this chart, these are just a few things. There were other stuff that came out, and I don't even have the wheeled plow. I don't have my Chinese inventions, which include the plow, the gunpowder, the horse collar, a lot of things that were really, really critical. Now, how these got to Europe is not entirely clear, but we know that the Chinese were using a heavy plow and a horse collar by around 600, and the Europeans got it about 300 years later.
Right. whether they
word gets
devised
around,
it
or
on
whether
its
they talk to the
own,
Indians,
or they had
talk to
or
the
they
Indians,
had-
the Indians
right,
talk to the
to the Abbasids, and the Abbasids talked to the Byzantines, and the Byzantines talked to. It could have gone that way. It could have been an overland route, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, by 1230, you had the Mongols. So all this together, all of this information is moving back and forth.
But
But
you
really,
had
one of the things we can say about what we want to call the Dark Ages is that Europe had to basically, the Europeans had to recreate themselves, and they had to recreate themselves from small pockets, tiny pockets of people, not large cities, because the central authority had collapsed.
communication.
And so part of what's going on big time is what's called the agricultural revolution, in which you start having the heavy-wheeled plow, you start having the horse collar and horseshoes and shovels, and this whole group of very important instruments, and three
It's a three-crop rotation.
three-crop rotation. All of this is being brought in, challenged, trial and error sort of experimentations, because these people have to feed themselves first. And that's really one of the things you can say about this period, is the emphasis had to be on survival.
So there's no growth when you're struggling for
Right.
survival. Okay, but this leads into a concept called periodization, which don't go there. But the issue is breaking history into periods. And we talked about this a little bit at the beginning.
Yeah, because if you hand a high school kid a book that's 800 pages long with no breaks, they freak out.
And I wouldn't cover it anyway, but
No.
yes. So, but the point is, the world did not suddenly change on September 10th, 472.
Right, right.
It was a gradual process.
But periodization can be somewhat misleading when you're talking about antiquity. If you're talking about the Greeks and the Romans, most of the history textbooks you get put the Greeks first and talk about them, and then talk about the Romans. And many of my students get really confused and think, oh, the Greeks all died out and the Romans took their place. When in actuality, they were doing the same. They were building their empires at the same exact time.
Yeah.
So that's important to know about antiquity.
Okay, and I was mentioning this chart here because these are terms that are more or less agreed on. They don't have political baggage. They're boring, early medieval, high medieval, late medieval. I still can't find consistent agreement on when one starts and when stops. I do find a lot of things using it, and early modern. What we don't have here are the politicized terms, which you do encounter, which are these ones.
Dark Ages, Renaissance, and Enlightenment.
Renaissance is an interesting term because it seems Renaissance was actually not a term used very much until the 19th century.
19th century, a historian by the name of Jules Michelet was trying to work out this periodization. The early part of the 19th century was really the beginning of professional history. Professional historians looking at the primary sources and trying to write the narrative.
Okay, everybody writes history.
Yeah,
everybody writes
history, but professionalized history is early people have fun running.
These terms, Dark Ages, Renaissance, and Enlightenment, when they are used, there's normally somebody with an axe to grind with something they mean to say. I want to talk about the origin of the phrase, the Dark Ages, what it really means, because, well, the first reference we have to something called the Dark Ages comes from a philosopher and the first humanist named Petrarch, writing in the 14th century.
An Italian, or a man from the Italian peninsula from the 14th century. He was someone who lived about the same time as Dante Alighieri, the man who wrote the Divine Comedy and the Inferno.
Yeah, there's a picture of him.
There he is.
Yes, a little chubby guy. Here is his actual quote. "My fate is to live among varied and confusing storms. But for you, perhaps, if as I hope and wish you will live long after me, there will follow a better age, when the darkness has been dispersed. Our descendants can come again in the former pure radiance." That is the quote which people say is the first time anybody made a reference to the Dark Ages, even though they're in separate sentences. Petrarch was writing about how literature in the Middle Ages wasn't as good as the Roman literature.
Right. We have a question from Slammed, and going back to the original sources, or was that later in the Enlightenment? This is one of the interesting things. Petrarch is going back to the original sources.
He was translating. He found
He's
some lost Greek
translating
manuscripts,
some of the lost
and he was
Greek
arguing that
and
this
Roman.
is the good stuff.
Yeah,
His
this is the good
argument
stuff. Yeah.
that was that there was a time of light in the time of the Romans, and we're very
Right.
primitive now. Petrarch was a brilliant poet.
Yes, and then you get into the later period, what is sometimes called the Renaissance or the late Middle Ages, and their watchword was ad fontes, to the fount, to the spring, back to the original sources. So this looking at original sources was always there in some way or another. So yeah, Slam, that's not unusual for many of these periods.
Okay.
It's not that one of these times ignored the original stuff.
So Petrarch was
right.
called the first humanist. He wrote stuff for the fun of it. He climbed a mountain for the fun of it. Claims to be the first person to ever do that, which I don't believe, but he wrote about it. The first travelogue. I climbed a mountain today. Boy, is it hard.
Yeah.
Didn't have any good crampons or nifty Gore-Tex.
Yeah, it's pretty good for someone else. It's that stout.
That stout, and didn't have boots and had to wear this funny dress-like thing all the way up. Okay. So the first actual use of the phrase Dark Ages as one phrase was from a gentleman by the name of Kaiser Baronius, who was a monk writing in, I believe, the 15th century.
Oh, okay.
No, scratch that. He was writing, it was a response to a Protestant history.
Mm-hmm.
He was writing a Catholic history of the church.
But so he's the guy who didn't use the word dark.
His phrase, which has been translated as darkness, was Seculum obscurum.
Seculum obscurum.
Which basically, secular, means age, obscurum, hidden or dark.
Hidden age.
And what he was saying was that there's this period of time, and he was specifically talking about from after Charlemagne until about the time of Peter Abelard, there weren't any books. He went looking in libraries, he went looking in monasteries. They didn't write any books.
Yeah.
And he said, his phrase Dark Ages was referring to the fact that it's dark, it's obscure. I don't know what they're talking about.
Right.
But it was really when we get into the Reformation that we start getting Dark Ages used as a pejorative.
Right. And I don't even agree with the idea of calling it the Reformation. I think it was a revolution. But that's another argument.
Okay. The design of the Reformation was to restore Christianity to what it was first and to purge it of those corruptions which it was overrun in the later and darker ages. This is a quote from a history of the Church of England written in the 1680s. So by this time, Dark Ages is being used with clear pejorative intent.
Right.
Now, we were talking...
And blaming the Catholics for the whole thing.
We didn't have blame the Catholics. This is in England. They didn't have any Jews.
Yeah, they had already picked out the Jews, so they had to blame the Catholics.
Now, we've had this discussion before, which is what the word means to somebody else doesn't really matter. Yeah. So the fact that to these people, Dark Ages was a pejorative doesn't mean it has to be to me.
Right.
Just as I've talked about, the gay people can adopt the word queer, and it doesn't. It's not a put down. It's just what they choose to use.
They took it away. They took the weaponization from it.
But during the Reformation, there is no question that the Dark Ages was a phrase used to describe things in a dark way, as in we're better. Then you get into this Enlightenment, which is also a loaded phrase, era.
Yeah.
With
dear old Gibbon.
Voltaire. Who was Gibbon?
Gibbon. Yes. No. No. Edward Gibbon.
I believe it was Edward Gibbon.
He was
a member of Parliament.
Member of Parliament and a very good writer, and he wrote The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire.
The history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire.
I've never read
in 6 volumes, 1.3 million words.
Huge undertaking, and he blames the Christians.
Yes.
For the terrible things that happened to wonderful, wonderful Rome.
And I misspelled Voltaire.
You did.
Yeah, all right. But Gibbon was basically taking this attitude, which basically all history leads up to us. We're brilliant, we're wonderful. Everything before us was harsh. But Gibbon is actually putting down all the Christians at this point.
Yes.
With the Dark Ages and the Enlightenment, the age of deism and reason, even though he was a church member, but it was still...
He had to be.
Yeah. It was still... Okay.
Yeah.
What about Voltaire?
Voltaire, the wonderful French stylist and writer who basically liked to talk about his own time as being the the Enlightenment, and was trying to blame the Catholic Church yet again for the Dark Ages.
But Voltaire was also an incredibly gifted writer.
Yeah.
In fact, he wrote the quote that you use, which is, "History is a bag of tricks we play on the dead."
Yes.
He wrote these pithy little things which caught on, and I don't have any good quotes that I could find in the time we had, but he was basically describing earlier times as leading up to them, and these guys were stupid.
Well, and he had also, as a young man, observed some of the ramifications in France of the Inquisition. He had
Really?
He had actually observed people being tortured. And his comment to that was, "Écrasez la femme," crush the infamous thing, get rid of Inquisition, get rid of the dogma. So he was more against dogma than he was against Christianity.
All right. And of course, Michelet, as I mentioned before, Michelet basically said that the Dark Ages came before. We had the Renaissance, which was in France, not in Italy.
Yes.
The Renaissance is a French word. It was the rebirth of reason and thought. And again, I'm surprised to be taking this attitude that the Dark Ages is largely an attack on Christianity.
Right, yeah.
But it was this, we have this reason, we have this better time. It's all French because the French have figured everything out. Okay. And then what about the Greek Dark Age? We're getting late on time.
We're getting late on time, but I do want to talk about that there was actually a Dark Age, the Greek Dark Age. You have to go back into early antiquity to find out more about it. But it was a period around 1177 BCE.
Or BC, if you prefer.
When you had the Minoans, the Mycenaeans, the Phoenicians, the Egyptians, you had this amazing growth of diplomacy, of trade. Everybody knew each other. It was quite a blossoming of a time. And then they had a famine, they had plague, and then they think, they're not sure, an invasion of people that were called at the time the Sea People. And for the Greeks, who at the moment they were called the Mycenaeans, or they called themselves the Mycenaeans. They had a language, they had a written language, and it's where all the old tales of the Iliad and the Odyssey.
This is great, sure, but we are low on time, and we can do a show on the Greeks sometime. I'd love to.
Anyway, but what actually happens to the Mycenaeans, the Greeks, is that they're attacked. They head for the hills. They literally head for the hills and hide in the hills for 400 years. And in that amount of time, they forget how to read and how to write. They lose their written language. Yeah, that they're just these little. So
everybody wanted around like villages. Brian Blessed.
No, yeah.
Even the women.
No. They could still talk. They still had an oral tradition. It's beautiful oral tradition. But what they absolutely didn't have was literature, was language, was written language, was trade. And so they had to be taught once they came back down from the hills. That really was a dark age.
Okay. By the way, the Sea People were not the Philistines. We actually have a lot of information about the Philistines.
Yes.
The Philistines were this was a question that somebody asked.
Yeah.
The Philistines were actually not Philistines in one sense, that apparently they had a fairly developed civilization.
Yeah. And the Canaanites were the Phoenicians.
Okay. Again,
I don't know who
we're supposed to be talking about the...
No, the Philistines might have been. There's one history for the person who wants to find out. The Philistines might have been the Mycenaeans. There is some very close archaeology now that says there's a lot of resemblance between the two.
Thank you. That's good.
Next.
Okay. So I want to wrap this up and just talk about, I didn't mention the other thing about the Dark Ages was during the Romantic era of the 19th century, there was a total change of perspective. This is not very long after the Enlightenment puts them down. You've got, you've got Walter Scott.
Right.
And you've got, 100 years later, 50 years later, you've got Tolkien, you've got others who are creating this beautiful sense. And we now look at castles and we say, that's pretty. And so we've created an opposite mythos of this time of purity, of chivalry, of
knights in shining armor,
nobility, and low taxes.
And low taxes,
which, they weren't as terrible as we say, but they
Right.
also weren't as wonderful. And when you go to a Renaissance fair, which is really a Dark Ages fair in many ways, they will say,
Medieval
we
fair.
know, it's okay. We like to pretend.
Yeah, that's why they call it the Society for Creative Anachronism. It's not the Society for Creative Accuracy.
Right. I hit you. Oh, you have plague.
Yeah.
The end. Sorry, that was in the Dark Ages. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So the question is, I've thought of this really
But, yeah.
witty thing I want to say. This is a
Sure.
phrase that I came up
Go
with
for
on
it.
my own. What's in a name? You know, that which we call a rose by any other word would smell as sweet.
Taken.
Oh. So calling it the Dark Ages, does it change what it is?
Does it change our perception of it? And, perception is very important.
Well, would you call it the Rainbow Ages? Would you feel differently?
Sure, if we
You know,
call
the
it
knights
the
were
Rainbow
wandering
Age,
around during the Rainbow Ages, and there wasn't a lot of information, but
it was a rainbow age.
so the question is, does it change it? Is it appropriate? Which is really the question that I was trying to answer when we started this discussion.
Sure.
Is it appropriate to call it the Dark Ages? Because I'm not going to offend anybody. You know,
No,
there are racial
they are
terms I don't
dead.
use because they offend people.
Right.
Nobody's going to be upset. You called us the Dark Ages. I've been dead for 2,000 years, but you still called me dark.
Yeah.
1,500, whatever.
50. Yeah. Anyway, so basically, I guess we have to put out a warning for not so much be sensitive about the people of the Dark Ages.
Be sensitive about how it might affect
But-
your thinking.
Yeah. Be aware that there was a lot of other things going on at the time, and to just categorize this entire world based on what was happening in this one little area, because
Is it squid or is it calamari?
yes, well, and
how you call it?
yeah, but all of these dynasties, all of these empires end up falling apart at one time or another.
Okay, my concern and the reason why I have somewhat come over to your way of thinking on this, well, somewhat, I'm still going to be difficult,
Of course,
is
he always is difficult.
they're training that. One, if we're looking at another time and calling them the Dark Ages,
Mhm.
then we are by definition being very chauvinistic about our own time,
Right.
and basically thinking everybody else is inferior.
Mhm.
And while I don't think they had secrets of medicine that we don't know,
No.
they also weren't stupid.
Right.
A bigger issue that I have, and this is a question I have, is calling it the Dark Ages effectively racist? Because it only applies to the handful of people who happen to be the ancestors of the most prominent forces in America, meaning the French and the English and the Northern Germans.
Right.
These are the people whose ancestors are still largely running America.
Right.
I mean, there are plenty of exceptions, but still. And so we're looking at it. This is the time when this particular group of people's ancestors were going through a dark age.
Mhm.
At the same time that the Chinese,
Mhm.
the Baghdad
Mayans,
dynasties, well, the Mayans. Well, yes, the Mayans.
Incas.
All right. Well,
you can go down the list.
okay. So the point is, when we
the
call them,
Mollies.
oh yeah, the people of Mali, Africa. Yeah, Africa was starting to
Africa
grow into
was-
its
was-
own
Yeah.
amazing
Yes.
Enlightenment, Renaissance, whatever
Yeah.
politically charged term you want to
We
use.
didn't even get to the Mughals.
As Ayatollah
in-
says, it's not
in
really racist,
India.
it's cultural. I think it might even be racist if you say it's only referring to white people and not Chinese people who didn't have a dark age. You
Right.
know, it's also
Well, no,
cultural.
that's
What?
they had downward.
Right. But
trends.
when you talk about the period
Right.
from 475 to 1100, give or take a little bit,
Right.
as being a dark age,
Right.
you are denying the agency of the Chinese
Right.
and the Indians who had thriving civilizations and amazing innovations.
And you saw the art that we brought. By whose standards are we saying this is a dark age? Really, honestly, if you're talking about intellectual development, sure, but that's not the only standard to measure a society on, like ours. Anyway, no, social media is a different way of a different standard to measure us by. I mean, there aren't a lot of people out here that are writing these huge books, like 6 volumes on the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. Does that mean that we are intellectually inferior? Well, yeah, we could fight about it, if only because, he's using verbosity to make up for the fact that he didn't have all the facts. We have a lot more of the information than Gibbon ever did.
Okay.
So,
but still, calling it the Dark Age is leaving out the rest of the world.
right. It's leaving out the rest of the world, and it's saying it's dark because we didn't have this thing.
But at the same time, there was a time when a group of people went through a bit of a reverse. They lost, they did not grow as a time. And if you want to draw a lesson from this, you can call it dark, you can call it the Rainbow Age. We still know that having exchange of goods, services, ideas, and having some limited, ideally, central government and authority, law enforcement, defense forces, leads to a growth of society, leads to a prospering of innovation and even better art.
And definitely, these are people who pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and stole from everybody they could think of. So, yeah, they learned how to really recreate society. So that's nothing to sneeze at. You know, after the zombie apocalypse, we too are going to have to do the same thing. So I assure you, start learning about 3-crop rotation and heavy-wheeled plows and water wheels. Water wheels are really important. We're going to like water wheels.
Not me. I want to be the soothsayer. Give me your money and I'll tell you the future.
Oh, I see. Yeah, you're going to be staring at the stars.
You're going to die. Sometime.
Well, we are going to sometime. Yeah.
That's
a good guess.
Right.
It's a good guess.
So I think we'd like to wrap it up right now.
Did we have any more?
We've got a little bit of debate over somebody thinks that the term racist is a little too loaded, but
yeah,
I said it to be loaded. It's okay. I'll try to get a reaction. It's all right. But I think we're about ready to wrap this up. Just the point is, Dark Ages is a loaded term. I try not to use it except when it really helps to make a good punchline.
Or he wants to make me mad. Anyway,
you have these Dark Ages attitudes. I just can't get past them.
This meatloaf is so Dark Ages.
How Dark Ages was it? It was dark all the way to the middle.
All the way to the middle.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We're going to join you again. I think it's going to be a couple of weeks.
It's going to be 2 weeks. Yeah.
We're approximately.
And we don't know what it's going to be yet.
We do. You just haven't agreed to it yet.
Oh, what are we going to do?
I think it'll be a monumental importance.
Oh, that one. Yeah. Cool.
We're talking about doing a show on monuments and their impact on society, but I don't want to promise it because things go wrong.
Things go wrong.
Anyway, thank you. Good night, ladies and gentlemen, and all the ships at sea.
Take care. Good night.